For 4 years, it felt like a never-ending stream of chaos and controversy coming from the Trump White House. And other than policy, the seeming lack of chaos now may be the biggest change from Trump's tenure to that of Joe Biden. A feeling that Biden tapped into last week, talking about the oil pipeline gas shortages.
Don't panic, number one. I know seeing lines at the pumps or gas stations with no gas can be extremely stressful, but this is a temporary situation.
And we saw Biden appeal to that same sense of calm this weekend as he urged Israeli and Palestinian leaders to end their ongoing attacks. And Biden has been urging calm and patience as the nation has emerged from the worst of the COVID pandemic. That approach and the contrast between Biden and Trump may help explain Biden's positive approval rating, 53%, and why his approval is 12 points above water, both numbers that Trump never came close to. But if you flip over to Republican TV, you might very well conclude that we're approaching the apocalypse. Everything is going wrong, they say, around the world and here at home. And of course, they know who to blame.
And that's why it's so important to have a united front and stand up against this radical agenda. And look, Joe Biden's failure of leadership is on full display.
Find a bad news story and they're blaming Biden for it. Israel and Hamas close to all-out war? Biden's fault. Despite Trump's boasting after 2 Israeli-Arab cooperation deals were signed last September.
After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East.
Not so much. Now that's first in a long list. Last week's gas shortages after a key pipeline was hacked? Biden's fault. A spring surge of border crossings? Biden's fault. The slower than expected job numbers and rise in some consumer prices? Guess who they're blaming?
They're waiting in lines to get gasoline, killing jobs. Inflation is through the roof. Look at the lumber prices right now. Anything you buy at the grocery store is up, and Joe Biden is paying people not to work.
So how should the president and Democrats respond, or should they? Let's bring in our next guest to discuss, Democratic strategist Kristal Knight. So, Kristal, how should President Biden, the White House, and Democrats combat this everything is in chaos claim from the GOP? Or should they leave it alone? I get the upside of not responding and just getting stuff done, which is the approach the White House seems to be taking. But left unchallenged, those things can take fester and root.
Well, I think the press secretary has already done a great job with combating this rumor, if you will. When you're the president, you have to rule whether it rains one day or whether the sun is shining one day. And right now, the White House is, having a lot of challenges rain on their parade. And so I don't think that it's important for the president directly to address this. That's why he has a communications department. He has a press secretary, a capable person in Jen Psaki, and she has already addressed that the president and the administration is attempting and is actively going through the challenges and handling them head on. This is a time for Americans to see the president lead, and that's exactly what he's doing.
Among those chaos issues we went through in the intro, I've seen some polling that gives Biden less than great numbers on the border. Is there any indication that the public is blaming him for anything else, like what's happening in Israel or the pipeline?
Well, these are challenges that were unforeseen when he took office. One thing that we absolutely know is the border crisis is always the border crisis. That's not anything that's unique to President Biden. Other presidents have had to figure out what to do. Immigration is a tough issue, and I don't wish that on any president, no matter if it's Democrat or president or Republican. And so I don't think that these, challenges are unique. I wouldn't even call them chaos. These are things that happen to every single president when he takes office. And so he is figuring out his agenda on the, addressing this surge at the border and figuring out what's the best way to respond. And we have to give him time. He's only been in office a few months. And so if this is what Republicans plan to do throughout his entire administration, then they should just say that they don't support a Democratic president and not make this about Biden and his policies.
I'm glad you made that point, because I'm not hearing or seeing a lot of Democrats turning these issues back on Donald Trump. And there's an argument to be made that he made all of these issues worse, from his supposed peace deals in the Middle East, not very peaceful today, the comedy of infrastructure week when it comes to the pipeline and gas shortage, the pandemic response leading to job problems, and of course the border. Plus, most people felt like there was chaos almost every day of his presidency. Why not counter these chaos claims by pushing them back on Donald Trump?
Well, listen, President Biden is the president. And I don't think that it serves Democrats well to always go back and say, well, at least we're better than the last guy. We already know that because voters voted for President Biden. He is the president right now. So the voters have already spoken by making sure that we have a new sitting president, which is absolutely what we have. I think what the Democrats can do is speak with one message and one voice and make sure that everything that we're doing and saying is in support of this administration. As I said earlier, this president has only been in office for a little over a few months. And so what we have to give him, time to do is lead. And so he needs to, give us the opportunity to show Americans what his plans are as it relates to rising inflation, as it relates to the border surge, as it relates to, the crisis that's happening in the Middle East. And so, again, these things are not unique. Remember, President Biden was the vice president for 8 years under Obama. And so he is a tested leader. And we absolutely know and understand that whatever the things that he will come up with to counter all of these challenges that have happened in the last week, it will actually go through.
All more than fair points. But if there is one theme that could lead to a sense of chaos among voters, it may well be the rise in crime, especially violent crime in major cities. Crime and policing have become a major issue in the New York City mayoral race, in the race for Philadelphia DA, in Virginia's statewide races, and in all three we're talking about upcoming Democratic primaries. We know this is going to be an attack point for Republicans when it comes to the general elections. For the primaries, this feels like a big moment in the progressive versus moderate Democratic tug of war when it comes to policing issues and ways of combating crime. Do you agree?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about crime and policing. May 25th will be the anniversary of George Floyd's death, unfortunately, but that is a significant date that's going to be imprinted in many people's minds, and I'm sure many candidates will be talking about that. How we figure out how to reform policing in America is a tough issue for any president to tackle, and so I think that this is a challenge that many districts are trying to figure out what works best for them. And so ultimately, voters will decide who's the best DA, who's the best police chief to, help rectify the challenges that have been facing those cities. So this really isn't a federal issue in the sense that, what can President Biden do but help push the George Floyd Policing Act? But it's really up to voters to decide in their respective cities and districts.
Understood. And police reform is an issue that sort of coincides when it comes to safety and crime issues. I'm just thinking because when it comes to general elections, we certainly learned in New York City elected Rudy Giuliani twice and Michael Bloomberg 3 times, proving that even deep Democratic strongholds can and will vote Republican when crime and safety is a paramount issue. Other than the economy, which we never know how it's going to be going into the midterms, I have a sense that crime and safety may be the most dangerous issue potentially facing Democrats in the midterms. I'm curious if you feel the same way.
Well, yes, I don't believe that crime and safety are really partisan issues. These are things that people all across the board have the same general sense of. They want to be protected. They want to know that the people that they've elected care about protecting citizens in their cities and in their districts. And so what can Democrats do to make sure that the message is best resonating with them? They can identify messaging that really speaks to how they will, handle hard crime, how they will handle reform in their respective city. And so I think that's really the messaging is the biggest piece. And then the policy that will back up the messaging. What kind of policies will a new district attorney implement to make sure that there are bad actors off of the street and also that cops are doing their jobs? And really what we can really look to when we're looking about or when we're thinking about new elected officials, particularly in the DA races, is what's been their past stances on policing and policing reform, and then what will they do once they get into office? And then voters have to hold them accountable.
Kristal Knight is a Democratic strategist and a former political director for Priorities USA. Kristal, pleasure talking to you again. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me back.
And up next, some updates on major stories making news. That includes two guys named GAETZ, Matt and Bill. Matt is a Florida congressman facing allegations that could get him into huge trouble with the law, and it just got a lot worse for him this morning. While Bill is the billionaire also dealing with allegations, and those got him into hot water with his soon-to-be ex-wife.